bedroom I'd spent months dreaming of, wishing I were in, had quickly become a cave of my own personal nightmares. I suddenly saw the bohemian mess for what it was. Dirty socks all over the floor, a faint smell of mould and must like an old cricket pavilion on a wet day. A duvet with holes burned from comatose chain smoking. The beautiful charcoals of naked women had morphed into ugly, knowing gargoyles staring down at me. "We had to go through this, now you do too," they hissed. "There's something I want you to hear," he slurred, and struck 2 violent chords in between an attempt at tuning his guitar. "Oh God, no, it's fine, you don't have to." "Dolly Alderton," he announced, as if he were at an open mic night. "I am very smitten. I wrote this song for you." He started playing the pattern of 3 chords he'd already played me over and over again before. "I saw her on a train," he sang in an Americana croak. "Life would never be the same after the first night we—" "Hector," I said sullenly, as I felt the wine hit me with full force. "I think we should stop seeing each other." I left with Farley early the next morning, and that was it. I never saw him again. I was assured by Farley and Scott that I really did break his heart, and apparently the Mulberry Bayswater handbag of an overnight guest didn't appear on the kitchen table for at least 3 weeks after that night. Footnote: Hector is now a very successful entrepreneur and married to a Hollywood actress. I found out through an article in the Mail Online while sitting in my pyjamas eating a whole chocolate Yule log to myself. Go figure. Things I am scared of. Dying. People I love dying. People I hate dying, so I feel guilty about all the times I said bad things about them. Drunk men on the street telling me I'm tall. Drunk men on the street telling me I'm fat. Drunk men on the street telling me I'm sexy. Drunk men on the street telling me I'm ugly. Drunk men on the street telling me to cheer up. Drunk men on the street telling me they want to shag me. Drunk men on the street telling me they'd never shag me. Drunk people trying on, stealing, my hat at parties. Losing jewellery. Falling out of a window. Accidentally killing a baby. Parlour games. Talking about the history of American politics. Starting fires everywhere. Not understanding the washing machine. Cancer. STDs. Biting down on wooden lolly sticks. Plane crashes. Plane food. Working in an office. Being asked if I believe in God. A bit. Being asked if I believe in horoscopes. A bit. Being asked why I believe in the above. Going into an unarranged overdraft. Never owning a dog. Being Bjorn again. After I stopped seeing Hector, I assumed it would be only a matter of time before Farley and Scott fizzled out. I had been the glue that bonded them, and when I left that grimy block of flats in Notting Hill, I assumed they'd have little left in common. But within a few weeks, Farley dropped into conversation that they were going on a mini-break to Cambridge. Jealousy pumped through my blood system and my whole body stung like it was vinegar. I was the one who'd always had a boy on the scene, and yet now she was the one with an actual proper older boyfriend. Not one who wore her knickers into work, not one who made her wear a fishnet body stocking, or didn't know her surname, or only texted her once a week. Farley had a boyfriend who spent more time with her sober than not sober, who took her on mini-breaks and rang her instead of texting and wanted to have actual conversations with her. "What's even in Cambridge?" I ranted bitterly to AJ. "What, like a Bella Italia? Well, good luck. Have fun." "What's he like?" AJ asked. The truth is I barely knew. "Bad news," I said gravely. "Too old, too serious for her." And then, 3 months in, almost to the day, he told her he loved her. She announced it at a dinner with mates. We all toasted it and shrieked with joy. I wrote a sad soliloquy about it on my iPhone notes on the night bus home. Although I'd hated watching Farley be treated so badly by stupid teenage boys over the years, being led on, ignored, dumped, I realised there'd been a safety in it. As long as boys weren't taking any serious notice of her, I still had her all to myself. The minute a grown-up man with a brain stopped and took interest in her, I was utterly fucked. How could he not fall in love with her? She was beautiful, funny, the kindest person I knew. She'd spent years lending me money to get out of trouble and picking me up at 3 a.m. in her car when my bus home had stopped running. She was made out of the stuff that would make the perfect partner. She thought of others first. She listened. She remembered things. She left notes in my packed lunchbox before I went to work and sent cards just to say how proud she was of me. The way I had always made boys like me was with smoke and mirrors, exaggeration and bravado, heavy makeup and heavy drinking. There was no performance or lies with Farley. If a boy ended up loving her, he loved every cell of her from date one, whether he knew it or not. She was my best-kept secret, and now it was out. We had our first row since adolescence at a Christmas party at our friend Diana's house the following year. I was there with Leo. She arrived late with Scott, and it was the first time I'd seen her in a month. I made no visible effort to say hi to her, but watched them out of the corner of my eye. I made a point of laughing very loudly at very unfunny things, so she knew I was there and having demonstrative levels of fun without her. When she came over, the conversation was stilted and curt. "Why have you been ignoring me tonight?" she finally asked. "Why have you been ignoring me for a year?" I replied. "What are you talking about? I texted you yesterday." "Oh yeah, texting. Texting you're great at. Texting is your get-out-of-jail-free card that means you don't have to see me for months on end and go to Scott's flat every night, and when anyone asks you about it, you can say, 'Oh, but I text her every day.' Can we do this upstairs?" she hissed. I refilled my plastic cup with Glen's vodka and a splash of Coke and stomped up to Diana's bedroom. For 2 hours we shouted at each other. We started very loud and then got quieter, until finally we were too pissed and tired to carry on and we made up. I told her she had abandoned me. I created a complicated metaphor about how I'd realised she'd always viewed me as Bjorn again. "What does that even mean?" she shouted. "Bjorn again. They were the warm-up band for that Spice Girls gig we both went to. They were shit and we couldn't wait for it to be over. I've realised I've just been your warm-up act for 11 years until your headliner came along. Well, you've never been my warm-up act. You've always been my Spice Girls, and I wish I'd known sooner so then I could have put you down the bill and made you Bjorn again." She told me I was being melodramatic, that she was allowed to have her first boyfriend. I told her she was allowed to have her first boyfriend. I just hadn't realised she would prioritise him above everyone else. We emerged with our faces smeared like canvases splattered by Jackson Pollock with a bucket of mascara. Scott and Leo stood sheepishly at the bottom of the stairs in silence, having obviously run out of football and gentle current affairs chat. We grabbed them in our coats and left separately. Years later, Diana told me they'd turned down the music downstairs so the entire party could listen to the argument. "He's her boyfriend," my infuriatingly rational academic boyfriend said as we did the long walk back to his Stockwell flat while drinking tinnies. "They're in love. She's changed. That's fine. It's a part of growing up." "You're my boyfriend," I snapped. "I'm in love. I haven't changed. She's still the most important person in my life. She's still the person I want to see the most. I don't prioritise my relationship." He took a swig from his can of beer. "Well, maybe that's not normal," he replied. After 2 years together, Leo and I split up. I'd tried with all my might to make it work, but so much had changed since we'd met as students wandering round a house party in Elephant and Castle. We'd both grown up and turned into very different people. For 9 long months after I finished journalism training, I drifted from magazine to newspaper as an unpaid chair filler under the guise of a work experience placement. I'd been turned down as an intern at Tatler, an editorial assistant at Weight Watchers magazine, and a waitress at a local Pizza Express. I reprised my old job as a promo girl to support myself, walking down Old Brompton Road with a bunch of out-of-work West End dancers and air hostesses, handing out flyers for a rib restaurant. I quit the day they made me dress up as a pig and was attacked by anti-fur demonstrators outside Harrods. It was all I thought about from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to sleep in my childhood bedroom. I yearned for a job in my early 20s with the same hunger as I did for my first boyfriend in my early teens, obsessing over who I knew who had one, grilling them on the details of how they acquired one, lying in bed night after night, wondering how many more years this could go on for. Finally, One early evening, I was standing on a train platform when I got a call from an unknown number. It was Tim, a story producer for E4's new structured reality show Made in Chelsea. I had written a series of online reviews of the first series, again paid in the postgrad currency of exposure, this time it actually worked, that the production company had read and found funny. He asked me to come into their East London office to talk about a potential creative job on the show. I was interviewed by Tim and Dilly, the 30-something teeny-tiny, fresh-faced BAFTA-winning executive producer. They explained that they had read my review of the final episode, which had included some tongue-in-cheek advice to the producers of the show on how to make the following series better. The owner of the company, Dan, who'd found fame in the 1990s as the producer and co-host of a hugely successful late-night chat show, had scoured every review on the internet. When he found mine, he printed copies off for all the producers who read it on the way to a meeting with the channel. Surprisingly, they agreed with all of it. I left my first half-hour interview with Dilly and Tim relaxed about the fact it was very possible I would never hear from them again. I couldn't grasp at all what they were after, and we spent the majority of the interview dissecting the habits of posh people and psychoanalyzing the cast. We didn't really talk about my qualifications or work history or the job requirements at all. Little did I know then that accurate psychoanalysis is 90% of making successful reality television. And my years of observing the habits of posh people while feeling on the outside of their club, standing in boarding school tuck shops and in the smoking areas of Kings Road nightclubs, would, for once, overqualify me for a job. I got the second call from the series producer 3 days later while I was at a music festival with Leo. We had become the official glitter appliers of our camping party, a role we took to with aplomb. A boy coming up on acid heard repetitive ringing coming from my tent and thought it was craft work doing a surprise set. It was, in fact, Dilly. She told me I'd got the job as the show's story producer and to come in for my first meeting the next day. I arrived at the office straight from the festival, having not showered for 4 days, my nose sunburnt, my white blonde pixie hair matted into a mohawk. Leo waited in reception with our backpacks and tent, while I went to my first ever story meeting. I had run out of clean clothes, so wore Leo's oversized t-shirt as a dress with his denim jacket, laddered tights and a pair of ballet pumps. The outfit was a fitting send-off. It marked my last day as a kid and my first day as a grown-up. I fell in love with the creativity, fun and relentlessness of my new job, my new colleagues and my new bosses, nearly as ferociously as I had fallen in love with Leo. When I wasn't in the office or on location, I began picking up freelance journalism work, so I would write in the evenings and weekends, leaving me with little to no time for anything else, much to Leo's frustration. He felt a little cheated. He'd fallen in love with a rootless girl who wanted nothing but to pack a bag of plimsolls and jeans and go on any adventure he took her on, who embroidered his initials into jumpers and spent the entirety of a party locked in a bathroom with him, sitting in the empty bath, staring at his face with eyes like saucers. He ended up with a woman with her own adult identity and a preoccupation with her work. I felt our relationship had been one of the most enriching experiences of my life, and I knew he would always be a huge part of the person I'd become. But we had outgrown each other. I knew I had to let him go, so he could be with someone who really wanted to be in a relationship with all the love and commitment he deserved. Farley, AJ and I were finally moved out of our parents' suburban homes and into our first London home. AJ too had newly become single. Farley was still with Scott. A part of me hoped that by living with 2 single women, Farley would realise what she'd been missing throughout her 20s and she'd break up with Scott. But if anything, living with AJ and me only made her treasure him more. She once watched me rush around getting ready for a first date, trim some new fake eyelashes, apply them, then scream in agony as I realised I'd used the kitchen scissors that I'd chopped chilies with over a pizza the night before. She found a bag of frozen potato smiley face shapes and held them on my eyes as I texted the bloke to cancel. God, I don't miss this, she sighed. One night, when Scott was away on a work trip, Farley, AJ and I had been out dancing in our favourite Camden dive bar. We came back home and opened a bottle of out-of-date Tia Maria, and things got confessional in the way they so often do in the afterglow of a night out. I miss Scott. Farley announced after knocking back the last of her Tia Maria. Why? I yelped. AJ stared at me. I mean, he's only away for a few days. I know, but I still miss him when he's gone. And I get excited to see him every time. Even if he just goes to the corner shop and comes back, I look forward to hearing the front door open again. She saw my frown. I know it sounds cheesy, but it's true. I think she really loves him, I said the next day. Of course she loves him, AJ said while lying on the sofa and gnawing through a bacon sandwich. Why do you think they've been together for 3 years? I don't know. I thought maybe she just wanted to see what having a boyfriend was like. AJ shook her head in disbelief. Come on, mate. After I realised this, I finally started noticing small signs everywhere. Scott's parents met Farley's parents. Farley spent more and more weekends with his grown-up friends, doing grown-up things like 30th birthday weekends in the Cotswolds and wine tasting on a weeknight. Scott was round quite a lot, which I hated, and I also hated it when he wasn't there. He couldn't win. I didn't want him to win. The most annoying things people say. I'm not going to have a starter, are you? I'm more of a boys' girl. I'm a natural salesperson. I'm engaged. You're always late. You were quite drunk last night. You've told me this story before. He says it like it is. She's very handsome. I think you need a glass of water. I'm quite OCD. We've got a very complicated relationship. Would you like to sign Alison's birthday card? Let's go en masse. Let's have a catch-up. Are you across this? Marilyn Monroe was a size 16. You are due your next dental appointment. When was the last time you backed up? How do you find the time to do all those tweets? Sorry, it's been mental. Hollybobs. The Uncool Girls of Uncool Camden. When I was 24, in the first year of living in London with Farley and AJ, I went out for a drink with a friend on a Tuesday night after work. Despite my attempts to keep her out until last orders, she had to call it a night at 8:30 due to an early meeting the next morning. I texted anyone in my phone book who I knew might be around and want to carry on the night with me, but everyone was busy or in bed or tired. I sulkily got on the 24 bus home, my trusty steed that took me from the centre point of London to right outside my door in 20 minutes, and felt restless and disappointed that I couldn't stay out for just one more hour and one more glass of wine. It's a feeling I grew very used to, panicked and throaty, a sense that everyone in London was having a good time other than me, that there were pots of experiential gold hidden on every street corner and I wasn't finding them, that one day I was going to be dead, so why bring any potentially perfect and glorious day to a premature end with an early night? I snapped out of my sulk when the 24 pulled up at the pub at the end of my road. It was an NW5 hovel, a once-famous music venue turned grim boozer for the 9 a.m. drinkers of Camden. I got off the bus and went in. It was the first time I'd been since the day we moved in, when we were told Farley had made history by being the first patron in 40 years to order a coffee. The landlord went across the road to the corner shop to buy some Nescafe Gold blend and milk and charged her 26p. I ordered a beer and made small talk with the barman, who seemed completely unsurprised to be serving yet another solo drinker. A man next to me in his late 60s and sporting a grey Yeti beard asked me how my day had been, and I lamented the lack of a drinking buddy to see the night through with me. He said he was the man for the job. As we drank, he told me all about his life spent growing up in the area, the school he'd truanted from, how things had changed, the watering holes that had closed, the John Martin gig he'd been to at the Camden Palace before I was born, the live recordings of which I had listened to obsessively. I left at midnight, scrawling the man's number on the back of a beer mat with the mutual promise that we'd spend an afternoon together listening to records, but knowing I'd never be in touch with him again. He was just a night, of which I wanted many, an experience, an anecdote, a new face, a memory. He was a piece of advice, a gossipy story, and an interesting fact that lodged in my inebriated unconscious mind, only to be pulled out and regurgitated as my own one day. "Where did you hear that?" someone would ask. "I haven't the foggiest," I'd reply. The next evening, when I came home from work with an unmovable hangover to find Farley and AJ curled up on the sofa, I told them how I'd ended up in a dingy pub down the road the night before. "Why on earth did you do that?" AJ asked bemusedly. "Because it was a Tuesday night," I replied. And I could. I am so grateful that I fetishized the measured-out-in-coffee spoons minutiae of adulthood so vividly as a teenager, because the relief of finally getting there meant I found very little of it to be a burden. I've loved paying my own rent. I've adored cooking for myself every day. I even used to get a thrill sitting in the GP's waiting room, knowing I registered and got myself there without the help of anyone else. In my first year of bill paying, I'd practically go weak-kneed over a letter from Thames Water addressed to me. I would happily take on the administrative weight of responsibility that comes with being an adult in exchange for the knowledge that I always have the freedom to go to the pub on my own and make friends with an old man any day of the week. To this day, I've never ever been able to get over the fact that I don't need to drink gin from shampoo bottles anymore, that there is no lights out, that I can stay up watching films or writing until 4 a.m. on a weeknight if I want to. I'm relieved, energized, invigorated that I can eat breakfast foods for dinner, play records really loud and have a cigarette out of my window. I still can't quite believe my luck. My entire life as a young 20-something adult was lived like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, when he finds himself booked in at the plaza and orders mountains and mountains of ice cream from room service and watches gangster movies. I blame this entirely on a strict upbringing. Nearly every adult I've met who went to boarding school cannot believe they now live a life where they can go to a Kentish town old man's pub on a Tuesday night and not be given a detention or a suspension or a rustication, whatever that means. If university had been a playground in which to live out my adult fantasies, my own house and salary in London was a veritable nirvana. We searched for 3 months before we found our first adult London home. Our budget was small, and flats with 3 double bedrooms were hard to find. There was the house in Finsbury Park that cunningly photographed like a Notting Hill Mews house, and on arrival we realised was more like a wing of Pentonville Prison. "All we do here is stay and watching The X Factor while eating Sainsbury's Basics penne," AJ commented. There was the disastrous viewing of the flat on the estate in Brixton that Farley and AJ attended, alongside a large group of millennial hopefuls all queuing up outside like it was Madame Two-Swords. The estate agent forgot to bring the keys, so kept everyone waiting for half an hour. Then after they'd finally done a 3-minute tour of the dump and left, they all had to get down to the ground as there was a gunman on the loose being chased by police outside the property. Finally, just as we were about to lose hope, Farley found a 3-bed within our budget through a private landlord on Gumtree. It was just off a notoriously dodgy crescent that joined the Chalk Farm end of Camden Town with the Kentish Town end. It had a proper old-fashioned market twice a week that sold pairs of £5 slippers and cartoon bedsheets. It had a daily fruit and veg stall and a cash-only independent supermarket that sold weed from under the sandwich counter. It was graceless and garish and gorgeous. The house was a beautiful mess. One in a row of 1970s ex-council maisonettes made of Lego yellow bricks and bizarre placement and proportions of windows and doors that made it look like it was built in a rush by a teenager playing a game of The Sims. The front garden had 2 overgrown bushes that meant, in the summer, you couldn't make your way through the rotting wooden front gate without vigorous arm swiping. The tiles in the kitchen had English countryside scenes painted on them. The back garden was a forest of weeds. There were these odd liquid streak stains down the hallway wall which, after much examination, we could only assume to be piss. Everything smelled quite damp. The flat above us was occupied by squatters. The landlord, Gordon, was a good-looking man in his 40s with a boxy midlife crisis leather jacket and suspiciously dark floppy hair. He was also a BBC News presenter and liked everyone to know about it. His voice was loud and posh, his manner bizarrely brusque and informal. "So, this is the hallway," Gordon bellowed. "As you can see, a lot of storage space." We opened one of the large dusty white doors. A black box lay in the middle of the empty shelves with "Rat Attack" emblazoned on it in a bold yellow font. "Oh, ignore that," he said, scooping it up in his hand. "All sorted now." There was a brief exchange of glances between us. "Do you know what?" he said, crinkling his nose slightly. "I think the best thing is,
I'm just going to get out of your way and let you have a look round the place yourselves. Tell me when you've seen everything."
It was wonky and wobbly and eccentric, but we knew it was the perfect first home, not only for us but for our extended family of friends who we planned to have round every weekend. We went back downstairs to tell Gordon we wanted it. He was in the middle of a call.
Yeah, well, that's the worst case scenario," he said, flapping his hand at us dismissively. "Yeah, well, for the moment, let's just try and keep it out of court. Don't want to be back there again." He looked at us and rolled his eyes. "Great, well, I'll be round tomorrow at 10 to see this roof. Okay, yeah. Okay, yes, okay. Bye."
He put his phone in his jeans back pocket.
"Bloody tenants," he said. "So do you want it or not?"
We scrimped and saved to cover our deposits, so the first month was spent living in exciting, frantic, frenetic frugality. We had barely anything for the house, so Farley bought a pack of post-its to stick on various surfaces and state things like "TV will be here" or "toaster will be here." We ate Marmite and cucumber sandwiches every night for dinner. On the second night in our new home, I returned to find both the girls running around the living room in their wellies as they'd spotted the first mouse and didn't want it to run over their bare feet as they tried to catch it. Farley bought a block of Pilgrim's Choice cheddar from the nicer local, put it in her emptied vanity case, and waggled it along the carpet, trying to entice the mouse to a safe rescue. We also quickly made acquaintances with the manager of the local corner shop, a middle-aged bloke called Ivan, who was built like a Marine. On our first visit, he ominously told us that if we fell into any trouble with any gangs, to come to him immediately as it would be dealt with. Farley was wearing a string of pearls at the time. But I felt strangely safer knowing Ivan was always 10 seconds' walk from our front door, and when the mouse thing became a recurring problem, he always came to the rescue. I would often run straight out of the house barefoot in pyjamas and into the shop shouting, "It's back, Ivan! It's back!" with a sort of Blanche Dubois hysteria. "All right, darling, all right," he would say. "I'll come now. Do you want me to bring my gun?" I'd decline, ask him to bring his torch instead, and he'd crouch under every bed, fridge and sofa to try and find it. Eventually, Gordon organised for an exterminator to come in, an East End geezer with ironically the surname Mouser. When he laid down some traps, I asked him if there was a more humane way of dealing with the problem. "No," he said, his arms folded in dismay. "Okay," I replied, "it's just that I'm vegetarian." "Well, you don't have to eat it," he replied. Camden felt like the right place for us to be. It was central, it was near all the nicest parks, and, best of all, it was perilously, hopelessly uncool. None of our friends lived there. In fact, no one our age lived there. When we went out on Camden High Street, we were confronted with swarms of Spanish teenagers on a school trip, or 40-something men with Paul Weller haircuts and winkle-picker shoes who were still waiting for Camden's glory years of Britpop to return. Goon watch, AJ used to call it. We'd walk down the high street on a Saturday night and she'd slur, "Goon, goon, goon," in my ear, pointing at passers-by. For the first few months I lived there, I had a glamorous but ultimately ruinously self-obsessed musician boyfriend who lived in East London and refused to ever come visit me because it was 2007 to go to Camden. Occasionally, during the years we were there, we'd go for a party or a night out in East London and be surrounded by young, cool, gorgeous people, and we'd wonder if this was really where we were supposed to be at our age. But as we left, we would always feel rather exhausted by the experience and grateful that we lived somewhere where we never had to pretend we were cooler than we were, which was not very at all. We could go to the shops in our leggings and hoodies and no bra and not bump into anyone we knew. We could take over a dance floor doing a drunken comic can-can in a line and comfortably still be the coolest people in the entire bar. We could go out and spend the whole evening absorbed in each other, not trying to impress anyone. There was simply no one left in Camden to impress. One of the first things I bought for the house was an industrial-sized cooking pot fit for a soup kitchen. Our friends had always been great eaters, and I was thrilled to have a stove and a kitchen table to call my own. In those first years living together, we had people round for dinner 3 times a week. I worked out the cheaper things to make, pot after pot of dal, tray after tray of parmigiana.
We'd have candlelit dinners in our hideously overgrown garden in the summer, at one point so overgrown that a tree caught on fire in a strangely biblical way, and we all drunkenly threw saucepans of water and glasses of Ivan's dodgy £5 Sauvignon Blanc over it. There was a freedom in the feeling that our house was fundamentally too broken to fix. Gordon was relaxed about it too. He let us paint all the walls bright colours and never commented when the paint just stopped with a wobbly line on the staircase wall where we'd got to the bottom of the Dulux tin. It meant it was a house we could really live in, a house we weren't precious about. We could trash it on a Saturday night, and all it would take was a 10-minute tidy the next morning to make it look passable again. We could have our record player on its loudest volume and stay up until 6 a.m. without the neighbours complaining. I swear those 1970s houses were built to be disco-proof, because in the years we lived there we never received one noise complaint. In fact, the neighbour told me she'd never heard us. And for this reason, our house was also the place where everyone could come to get high. I got the majority of drug experimentation completely out of my system in my first couple of years of living in London. First, I created a familial rapport with a friendly drug dealer called Fergus. Fergus wasn't a sit in the car moodily and pass you a baggie under the dashboard dealer, but rather would join me late on a Friday night when I had friends round for dinner, rolling spliffs at the table and telling long-winded jokes while digging into the leftovers, before I'd finally send him packing with a Tupperware box of spaghetti carbonara. Farley, who'd always been much more sensible than me and was always in bed by midnight when we had people round for dinner, never had the pleasure of meeting Fergus, but was always baffled by the way I spoke about him as if he were a cousin or a family friend. One night, she was woken up at 4 a.m. by the sound of me giving Fergus an estate agent's walking tour of the house as he advised me on the feng shui of each room. The next day she came into my room to find me huffing and puffing while moving my bed to the opposite wall. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I'm moving my bed. Fergus says it's not in a good position at the moment." "Why?" "Because the headboard's too close to the radiator. He says it's not good for your head to be near heat, especially for your sinuses." "Yeah, the man sells you Class A drugs, Dolly," Farley said. "He's in no position to be handing out health advice." Fergus dropped out of contact rather suddenly, as I was told they often do. So I was then pointed in the direction of CJ, who was a steadfast disaster. CJ was known to be the worst drug dealer in London. His timekeeping was appalling. He would regularly give the wrong order to the wrong customer and turn up at your doorstep half an hour later asking for the product back. His phone was never charged. His sat-nav was always conking out. It got to a point where he'd kept me waiting for an hour and a half, and I found myself telling him on the phone that he was his own worst enemy, like a frustrated teacher. The last straw came on the Thursday before I left London to go to a festival, and I rang him to ask if he could sell me some MDMA. "What's that?" he asked. "MDMA," I replied. "Mandy." "Who's she?" "Ecstasy. Come on. MDMA." "I've never heard of it," he said. No matter how I got them, or who I got them from, it was the acquisition of drugs that was nearly always more exciting than the drug itself. Talking about whether to get any, calling the number, getting the cash out, someone waiting in the flat while someone else went to go find the car, coming back with a tiny plastic pocket of herbs or powder, the promise of what was to come. That was the bit that got my heart beating fastest. Farley once witnessed the effort that it took to buy, divide up, and take cocaine, and she couldn't quite believe how tediously time-consuming it was. "Like making a shepherd's pie," she observed. But the time-consuming faff of lining up powder and rolling up spliffs is the very joy of it for someone who never wants a night to end. It's a distraction, a guaranteed night extension. It's the muting of your rational mind that says, "Go to bed at 11. We've talked about everything we could possibly want to talk about now," and in its place brings an artificial desire for the party to continue endlessly. For me, cocaine was only ever a vehicle to carry on drinking and staying awake long after I was tired. I was never that wild about any sensation it offered. I thought that, to be a writer, I had to be a collector of experiences, and I thought every experience worth having, every person worth meeting, only existed after dark.
I always remembered something Hicks told me as we lay in bed under the fairy lights of her student room twinkling around her window. "One day, we will sit in a nursing home, Dolly, bored out of our minds and staring at the quilt on our laps," she said. "And all we will have to make us smile are these memories." But the increasing regularity of these nights meant I felt myself being defined by these stories rather than a specialist collector of them. Staying out until dawn stopped being a one-off. Instead, I began equating any evening out with a hedonistic all-nighter. And worst of all, everyone else expected it of me too. A night with me meant a night that ruined you for the next day, and friends awaited that constant level of debauchery from me, even when we'd meet up for a quick pad thai on a Thursday evening. My energy, bank balance, and mental state couldn't keep up with it, and I didn't want to self-mythologize and inflate myself into this sort of tragic village drunk figure that everyone would dread planning a coffee with, knowing that it would probably end the following morning in some all-night casino in Leicester Square. "I do love those stories," Helen once said the morning after we'd been at a party, and I'd gathered a group of people to bore them with my best folkloric tales of nights out. "But there are quite a lot of them, Doll." Another thing that no one tells you about drinking as you get older is that it isn't the hangovers that become crippling, but rather the acute paranoia and dread in the sober hours of the following day that became a common feature of my mid-20s. The gap between who you were on a Saturday night, commandeering an entire pub garden by shouting obnoxiously about how you've always felt you had at least 3 prime-time sitcom scripts in you, and who you are on a Sunday afternoon, thinking about death and worrying if the postman likes you or not, becomes too capacious. Growing up engenders self-awareness, and self-awareness kills a self-titled party girl stone cold dead. I also ended up having 2 entirely separate jobs, working in TV and being a freelance writer. They demanded more and more of my time and focus, and regular blackout boozing and hangovers were not conducive to productivity and creativity. "You're trying to lead 2 lives," a friend once said to me when I was on the brink of exhaustion. "You have to choose which one you'd rather be. The woman who parties harder than anyone else, or the woman who works harder than anyone else?" I decided to strive for the latter. Life grew fuller in the daylight hours, and there was less need to escape it at night. But it would still take me some time to realise that the route to adventure doesn't just involve late nights and hot bars and cold wine and strangers' flats and parked cars with lights on and little bags of powder. I always saw alcohol as the transportation to experience, but as I went through my 20s, I understood it had the same power to stunt experience as it did to exacerbate it. Sure, they were the juicy confessionals you'd get out of people with dilated pupils in a loo cubicle, the old men with good stories who you'd otherwise never meet, the places you'd go, the people you'd kiss. But there was also all the work that you wouldn't get done when you were hungover. All the bad impressions you would make to potential friends because you were so drunk you could barely speak. All those lost conversations in which someone tells you something really, really important, which are rendered meaningless because neither of you can remember it the next morning. All those hours spent in sweat and panic in your bed at 5 a.m, your heart beating as you stare at the ceiling, desperately willing yourself to sleep. All the hours lost in the cul-de-sac of your head, torturing yourself with all the stupid things you said and did, hating yourself for the following few days. Years later, I would discover that constantly behaving in a way that makes you feel shameful means you simply will not be able to take yourself seriously, and your self-esteem will plummet lower and lower. Ironically, my teenage one-woman mission to be a grown-up through excessive drinking left me feeling more like a child than any other of my actions in my life. For years of my 20s, I wandered around feeling like I was about to be accused of something terrible, like someone could very easily march up to me and say, "You're the dick who drank Joe Malone pear and freesia bath oil in a pint glass at my house party for a dare. You owe me 42 quid. Or, "Oi, tosspot, I still can't believe you got off with my boyfriend outside the Mornington Crescent Sainsbury's." And I would have to nod reverently and say, "Yes, I can't recall that specifically, but I shall take your word for it, and I'm sorry." Imagine walking around in a world where you think someone is always about to tell you you're an arsehole and you're ready to agree with them wholeheartedly. What sort of fun is that? Wherever I am on a Tuesday night, from now until the day I die, you can be sure that I would prefer to be in a grim pub in Camden, drinking beer while talking to a stranger. But I eventually grew out of those clockwork regular blackout benders that wiped out the next day like a tsunami, just like I eventually grew out of the yellow-bricked maisonette that was crumbling down. For a short while, though, sitting in my overgrown Garden of Eden, drinking sour Sauvignon with the women I loved, the record player turned up loud and the empty plates piled high by the sink, I thought I lived in the best house in the world. I still think I did. Recipe: the seducer's sole meunière. Serves 2. I made this for the aforementioned musician I dated when I was 24, in the early stages of our courtship, to try and make him love me. It worked for about a week. I've since made it for other boys worth my time and brown butter, and the effects have been successful and more long-lasting. 4 tablespoons of plain flour, 2 fillets of lemon sole, 1 tablespoon of rapeseed oil, or sunflower will do, 50 grams of butter, 2 tablespoons of pre-cooked brown shrimps, juice of half a lemon, 1 tablespoon of capers, a fistful of flat-leaf parsley, chopped finely, salt and black pepper to season. Mix the flour and seasoning on a plate, then dip the fillets in the mixture so they are evenly coated. Shake off excess. Heat the oil on high until it's very hot. Cook the fillets for 2 minutes on each side. They should be crisp and golden. Set fish aside and cover with foil to keep warm. Lower the heat of the pan. Add the butter and melt until it is lightly brown. Take off the heat, toss the shrimps through the butter, add the lemon juice. Place the sole on the plates. Pour the butter and lemon mixture over each fillet, finishing with a sprinkling of capers and parsley. Season. Serve with a side of green salad or green beans and roast new potatoes. Don't serve with your big open heart. Dear friends. 3rd of February. Dear friends who I normally only ever get completely leathered with, I'd love to have you round to witness my attempt at behaving like an adult. Some call this a dinner party, but I think that sounds a bit stuffy, so I'm going to call it something vague enough to seem relaxed, but nothing that hints at a knees up, like a get-together, or some food and drinks, or a casual chilled-out dinner. The important thing is, this definitely won't be a knees up. Please arrive at my flat at 7 o'clock, by which I mean please plan to arrive at 7 o'clock until you get a very panicked message from me at 6 o'clock asking you to come at 8 o'clock because I couldn't find kohlrabi anywhere for Jamie Oliver's Asian slaw, so had to get a £25 Uber to Waitrose and back, and it put me behind an hour. As I said, it's all very casual and chilled. The guest list is as follows. 1 outrageously gay friend, Ed, who is happy sharing colourful stories from his varied sex life. He will be the sort of truth-telling court jester of the evening. Think Julian Clary meets the gravediggers in Hamlet. 1 benevolent new boyfriend belonging to Ed, name TBC, who everyone will make a huge effort with until just after the main course when he will be largely ignored until he books an early Uber home, but no one will realise he's left until 2 hours later. 1 northern feminist friend, Anna, who will make Ed feel more comfortable because of her liberal outlook and left-leaning politics, and vice versa. 1 single man I don't know that well from work, Matthew, who will flirt with everyone. Matthew isn't generically attractive, but he's tall and he has a loud voice. The plan is that everyone will fancy him as they get drunker and realise he's the best of a bad bunch, a bit like how we all felt about Nick Clegg in the 2010 election. 1 posh engaged couple, Max and Cordelia, to add a touch of grown-up hominess to the evening. They will happily talk about every detail of their upcoming wedding to keep things ticking over in moments of conversational sparseness. NB, keep Max and Anna apart from each other when talk tends to the welfare state or climate change.
One slaggy friend who drinks too much, Leslie, who will make us feel like we are still in the white heat of youth while simultaneously making us feel better about our lives. Thanks for this, Leslie. She will also take the lead in documenting the evening on Instagram with a hashtag such as #AsianSlaw, or #SinnersHavingDinner, or something else to this effect. Please bring a bottle of wine. I will assume you'll bring Oyster Bay, as it's the only one we all know that isn't rubbish tasting, but also only costs a tenner. Jacob's Creek will do. Echo Falls is, of course, welcomed, but its price point will be noted. After throwing all your coats on a bed and giving you a glass of warm white wine, of which I will have already consumed half the bottle before you arrive, out of sheer anxiety induced by the earlier Challenge Annika chase for kohlrabi, I will present you with 4 bags of kettle chips. This will be your starter. Having set myself the challenge of making 8 separate dishes to follow the trend of what everyone calls mega relaxed Ottolenghi-style dining, I will be absent for the first 2 hours of the evening. Safe suggested topics of conversation for the semi-sober are as follows. The efficiency of the Victoria line, comparing respective rent costs, recent celebrity deaths, hairdresser recommendations, who will be the next Bond, the dollar-pound exchange rate on a recent trip to New York, how much water we should actually all be drinking, any play currently in production featuring a recognisable TV actor, budgeting apps, bedding. Dinner will be at 10 p.m. By this point, everyone will be drunk enough to make sexual innuendos relating to the meal. Have you got hummus up your end? Let's toss the salad, etc. But not quite drunk enough to all get their phones out and watch mildly amusing videos on YouTube. This will happen after the main course and before pudding. Suggested videos. News reporter bloopers. Cats getting stuck in things. Children getting upset about missing chocolate. Dogs falling asleep in odd places. Anything with Celine Dion. Leslie, it would be great if you could incorporate drugs into the evening after this, either by sharing some old weed you have in your handbag or texting your dealer for some cocaine. If you plump for the latter, everyone will put up a bit of a fight, citing being so skint this month or having not done it since 2 birthdays ago, but rest assured, they still want it and will cough up when Candyman arrives. If you do go for the second option, Cordelia and Max will have an argument, as Max will offer to pay for an extra gram. Cordelia will be confused. They're apparently too broke to have a string quartet play signed, sealed, delivered as she walks down the aisle, but he's willing to drop 60 quid on Class A drugs for a room full of people he barely knows. Past midnight, it's time to get on with what I call the pointless and trite debating portion of the evening. This house believes in something obvious I read in a Guardian column versus this house believes in something slightly less obvious I read on a Vice blog. All topics and opinions will be broad, non-committal and predictable, with made-up statistics and exaggerated personal anecdotes to support flimsy arguments. Suggested subjects. Is there such a thing as left-wing or right-wing anymore? If women want genders to be equal, why is it called feminism and not equalism? Is it art if I could make it? Why do we eat pigs but not dogs? What is the legacy of Tony Blair according to all of our parents that we will pass off as our own opinions? How late is too late to have children? Was Margaret Thatcher a feminist? Will soaring London property prices mean people will actually move to Margate? Is it okay for Matthew to be wearing a Ramones t-shirt despite not being able to name one of the Ramones or any of their songs? When things get too heated between Max and Ed during homosexuality, nature or nurture, it's time for Leslie's drunk overshare, in which she reveals a secret about herself in a long and winding monologue to a silent audience. Suggested confessions for Leslie. You don't like any Welsh people. Recent chlamydia contraction. Your uncle groping you as a teenager. Affair with a married man. You think you can communicate with the dead. You think voting is pointless and boring. Fear of infertility. Scheduled times of departure. Ed, 4 a.m, after he's proved he knows the original dance routine to Hearsay's Pure and Simple and every word of Lil' Kim's rap for Lady Marmalade. Cordelia, 2 a.m, because of a made-up brunch the next morning. Max, 2:30 a.m, after getting an angry text from Cordelia to come home. Matthew and Anna, 4:15 a.m. in the same Uber. Leslie, 4 p.m. the following day. Really looking forward to it, guys. Will be so good to have a chilled one. Kiss, kiss, kiss. Recipe. Apple pizza with can't be asked ice cream. Serves 4. A recipe given to me by my mum to impress people when they came round to my crap house for crap dinner parties, requiring 0 skill or effort. For the ice cream, 4 egg yolks, must be very fresh, 100 grams of icing sugar, 340 grams of mascarpone cream, vanilla essence. Whisk egg yolks and sugar until pale and creamy. Beat in mascarpone cheese and vanilla essence. Put in a Tupperware box. Freeze overnight or for at least 3 to 4 hours. For the apple pizza, pack of puff pastry, pack of marzipan, 500 grams of apples, peeled and sliced, jar of apricot jam. Roll out the puff pastry. Cover with a circle of marzipan. Lay the sliced apples on top. Bake in the oven at 200 degrees Celsius till golden, and meanwhile heat apricot jam on the hob. When the apple pizza comes out, pour the warm apricot jam over the pizza and leave it to rest. Serve with the ice cream. Nothing will change. One of the things I hated most about Farley meeting Scott is that I never saw her family anymore. I missed her mum and dad and stepmum and brother and sister. For years I spent every other weekend and holiday with her family, and they were like my own. But after Scott came onto the scene, I didn't get the call-up from Farley anymore, so I only saw them once or twice a year. Scott now occupied the seat I had been in at the dining room table for birthdays and Sunday roasts. He was the one who joined them on cool, cosy autumnal half-terms in Cornwall, while I looked at the photos on Instagram. After a few months of living in our new London house, Farley invited me out on a walk with her family one Saturday afternoon. We stopped at a pub for lunch, and I basked in the warm familiarity of their rituals, the nicknames, the in-jokes, the stories about Farley and me when we were teenagers. I felt smug. Whatever space Scott had been occupying for the last few years was a different shape to mine, because nothing had changed at all. On our last leg of the walk, we lagged behind the rest of the group and the dog, like we'd always done as teenagers, due to competitive overeating at lunch. Scott's asked me to move in with him. "What have you said?" I asked. "I'm going to do it," she said almost apologetically, her tentative words floating in the cold air. It felt right when he asked me. "When?" "After I've done a year with you guys in Camden," she answered. I resented the phrase, "done a year," like I was a gap year ski season or a TEFL course in Japan, a thing you do once for an interesting anecdote. "Okay," I replied. "I'm so sorry. I know it's so hard." No, I'm happy for you," I said. We did the rest of the walk in silence. "Do you want to bake chocolate chip cookies?" Farley said when we got back to our house. "Yeah." "Great. Make a list of what we need and I'll go get the ingredients. And why don't we watch that Joni Mitchell documentary that's been sitting on the shelf for ages?" "Sure," I said. It reminded me of the time my mum took me to McDonald's when I was 8 after my goldfish died. We sat on the sofa eating cookies, our legs intertwined, our tummies poking out from pyjamas. Graham Nash was talking about the soul-bearing lyrics of Blue. "I know every single word of that album," I said. It was the only album we'd taken on a 3-week summer road trip when Farley passed her driving test age 17. Me too. Carrie's my favourite. All I Want Is Mine. I paused to eat the last of my cookie and wiped the crumbs from my mouth. We'll probably never do a road trip like that again. "Why?" "Because you're moving in with your boyfriend. You'll do all your road trips with him now." "Don't be stupid," she said. "Nothing will change." I would like to pause the story for a moment to talk about nothing will change. I've heard it said to me repeatedly by women I love during my 20s when they move in with boyfriends, get engaged, move abroad, get married, get pregnant. Nothing will change. It drives me bananas. Everything will change. Everything will change. The love we have for each other stays the same, but the format, the tone, the regularity and the intimacy of our friendship will change forever. You know when you're a teenager and you'd see your mum with her best friends, and they'd seem close, but they weren't like how you were with your friends. There'd be a strange formality between them, a slight awkwardness when they first met. Your mum would clean the house before they came, and they would talk about their children's coughs and plans for their hair. When we were kids, Farley once said to me, "Promise we'll never get like that. Promise when we're 50 we'll be exactly the same with each other. I want us to sit on the sofa, stuffing our faces with crisps and talking about thrush. I don't want to become women who meet up once every couple of months for a craft fair at the NEC." I promised. But little did I know how much work it takes to sustain that kind of intimacy with a friend as you get older. It doesn't just stick around coincidentally. I've watched it time and time again. A woman always slots into a man's life better than he slots into hers. She will be the one who spends the most time at his flat. She will be the one who makes friends with all his friends and their girlfriends. She will be the one who sends his mother a bunch of flowers on her birthday. Women don't like this rigmarole any more than men do, but they're better at it. They just get on with it. This means that when a woman my age falls in love with a man, the list of priorities goes from this, 1, family, 2, friends, to this, 1, family, 2, boyfriend, 3, boyfriend's family, 4, boyfriend's friends, 5, girlfriends of the boyfriend's friends, 6, friends. Which means, on average, you go from seeing your friend every weekend to once every 6 weekends. She becomes a baton, and you're the one at the very end of the track. You get your go for, say, your birthday or a brunch, then you have to pass her back round to the boyfriend to start the long, boring rotation again. These gaps in each other's lives slowly but surely form a gap in the middle of your friendship. The love is still there, but the familiarity is not. Before you know it, you're not living life together anymore. You're living life separately with respective boyfriends, then meeting up for dinner every 6 weekends to tell each other what living is like. I now understand why our mums cleaned the house before their best friend came round and asked them, "What's the news then?" in a jolly stilted way. I get how that happens. So don't tell me when you move in with your boyfriend that nothing will change. There will be no road trip. The cycle works when it comes to holidays as well. I'll get my buddy back for every 6th summer, unless she has a baby, in which case I'll get my road trip in 18 years' time. It never stops happening. Everything will change. Farley moved out on my 25th birthday. She and Scott found a 1-bed with a roof terrace to rent in Kilburn. It was opposite a gym, which they said was good because they like to play badminton, apparently. She made a fuss of showing me there was a direct bus from Camden to Kilburn High Road. I took it in a sulk on the way to their housewarming drinks. I spent the party chain-smoking on the roof terrace with Farley's teenage sister Florence on my lap, showing me her yearbook. Later, when I was drunk, I told her I secretly hoped one of them was unfaithful or Scott was gay, so Farley would have to move back to our house. She laughed and gave me a hug. "I hate that," Farley said, pointing at a framed Manchester United shirt covered in the team's signatures and hanging in the hall, sensing I needed something to pour my misery into. "Yeah, it's horrible," I replied. "Rank," she said. "Living with a boy. Ugh. Girls are so much better to live with. The best," she smiled. "Do you like the flat?" "I love it. I think you're going to be really happy here." And annoyingly, I finally believed it. Our university friend Belle, who came with a guitar and a desire to go out dancing all weekend, moved into Farley's room, and life carried on as normal. The fridge still leaked, the downstairs loo carried on being broken. Gordon still barged his way into our house uninvited most Saturday mornings, trying to dump hideous pieces of furniture on us as a treat because he couldn't be bothered to take them to the skip. We still did something called Ladies' Choice when one of us went to the shop, which means you get whatever chocolate bar they come back with. At first, I saw Farley more than I had done when we lived together, simply because she was hyper-aware of making me feel like nothing's changed. But eventually, I started seeing less of her. Everything changed. 3 months after they moved in together,
I was sitting at my desk at work when I saw on my phone that I had been invited by Scott to join a WhatsApp group titled Exciting News. I knew what it was, so I didn't open it. I'd been waiting for this moment since the day Foley told me they were moving in together. I wasn't ready to know, so I carried on working as if it was all just a pending dream, an unsent message in the ether's outbox. My phone sat on my desk for an hour, the notification staring at me. Finally, I got a call from AJ, who'd also been invited to the group, and she told me to open it. It said he was proposing. Valentine's Day, 4 years after their first date. He asked if we could get a group of her friends together and surprise her at a bar after he'd done it. I said I'd love to. I said I couldn't wait. I said I was over the moon. I cried, knowing I'd lost whatever battle I was fighting with whoever I was trying to fight against. Dilly walked past. "Dolbert," she said. "What's going on?" "Nothing," I muttered. "Come on." She grabbed my hand and took me to the boardroom. "Tell me what's going on." I told her about the proposal. She was up to speed with the saga, having already met Farley a few times and been fascinated by the Scott-Farley-Dolly love triangle for years, citing it as the perfect structured reality plot. "And I know it sounds like I'm being melodramatic," I said in between sobs. "I know people grow up and things change, but Christ, I never thought everything would change when we were only 25. She looked at me and sighed, shaking her head solemnly. "What?" I asked. "I always knew we should have rigged the place with cameras when you guys moved into that house," she said, rolling her eyes. "I knew it. I said it to Dave at the time. I know you say you don't want to be on camera, but this whole thing would have been such a nice series arc." I rounded up our friends and told them Scott's plan. We organised a time and place where we would be waiting with a present. I bought them a framed print off Etsy with the lyrics of There Is a Light That Never Goes Out, their favourite Smiths song. AJ said she'd buy me the Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now one. I had never wanted any of this. I never wanted her to spend every weekend with Scott's friends and their wives at barbecues in bloody Balham. I didn't want to see her for catch-up dinners. I didn't want her to move out after a year. I didn't want her to get married. And the worst thing was, it was all my fucking fault. If only I could have gone back in time and never set them up, never dated Hector, never gone back to Hector's on that snowy night in Notting Hill. I wished I could go back and ignore him when he'd started talking to me on the train. I wished I'd never got on that fucking train in the first place. The problem with having a Farley in your life is that their story feels like your story. She wasn't living the life I had planned for us, and I was in mourning for the future I now knew we'd never have. Up until Scott, we were on track with the plan. We went to the same university, where we chose to be in the same halls, then lived in the same house for 2 years. When we graduated, I thought we'd have the London years, not the London year. I thought there would be many houses, not a house. I thought we'd have hundreds of nights out together that ended at sunrise. I thought there'd be gigs and double dates and trips to European cities and weeks spent stretched out side by side on the beach. I thought we had claim over each other's 20s before we'd inevitably have to give the other one up. I felt like Scott had robbed me of our story. He'd taken 10 years that were mine. A month before Scott proposed, a group of us went out for drinks one Saturday night with Farley. "Scott said something weird to me this week," she announced. We secretly looked at each other, knowing we'd already chipped in for the Smiths print and had cleared Valentine's Day with blinking bug-wide eyes. "Go on," I said somberly. "He said he has a surprise for me for Valentine's Day, and it's small, but it's also very big. And I know this sounds crazy, but a part of me thought maybe it might be an engagement ring." "I don't think it's that," Lacey said suddenly, sure to avoid all of our intense gazes, the nanosecond meeting of which would surely give the game away. "No, I know, you're right, it won't be," Farley said quickly with a self-effacing laugh. "Yeah," AJ said. "I think you're reading into it too much, dude." "What could be small but big, though? I can't work out what it is," Farley said. "Oh, I don't know," Lacey said. "Maybe plane tickets for a holiday or something."
Maybe it's a dog collar, I said flatly. What? She asked. That's a small thing but very big. Maybe he's decided to become a man of the cloth and he wants to tell you on your anniversary. Oh, stop it, Dolly, Farley sighed. Or maybe, I said, my mouth catching up with the litre of white wine I had drunk. Maybe he's decided to get a Manchester United tattoo on his face. Seems small, but actually it's huge, really, isn't it? Might change the way you feel about him. AJ said.